Welcome everyone. Today's video is about one of the most famous events in human history, the Apollo moon landing. It happened on July 20th, 1969, the day when humans first set foot on the moon. Can you believe it? At that time, 650 million people watched it live on their televisions. It was a miracle for the world. People gathered around their TV sets, their eyes wide with wonder, waiting to see something that had never been done before. Neil Armstrong, an American astronaut, became the first human to walk on the moon. His words still echo in history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But was it really that simple? Or was there a deeper story behind this historic moment? Even today, many people question whether the moon landing was real or fake. Was it all filmed in a secret studio? Why do some say the American flag was moving, even though there is no wind on the moon? What about the strange shadows in the photos? In today's story, I will tell you everything, from why the moon mission started, how dangerous it was, the people who risked their lives, and the mysteries that still surround the Apollo program. So, listen carefully. This is not just a history lesson. It's a story filled with bravery, secrets, and science. And most importantly, you'll practice your English listening skills while learning about one of the most shocking events in the world. By the end of this series, you will know why the moon landing happened, how it happened, and whether it was really fake or not. So, are you ready? You might be wondering, why did America even want to go to the moon? The answer lies in something called the space race. The space race was a competition between two powerful countries, the United States of America, USA, the Soviet Union, USSR, which is now known as Russia. This was not just about science. It was about power and pride. Let me explain. After World War II ended in 1945, both the USA and the Soviet Union wanted to prove they were the most advanced country in the world. It wasn't only about building weapons. It was also about exploring space. The Soviet Union shocked the world when they launched the first satellite Sputnik 1 into space in 1957. Can you imagine? It was the first time something made by humans was flying around Earth in space. Then, in 1961, the Soviets made history again. They sent the first human into space, Yuri Gagarin. This was a huge embarrassment for the USA. They were losing the space race. People in America started to question, is the Soviet Union better than us? Are we falling behind? The pressure was on. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a bold promise in a speech. He said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." He promised that America would land a man on the moon and bring him back safely before the end of the 1960s. It sounded impossible. Let me tell you why. At that time, there were no smartphones, no internet, no GPS, no modern computers like the ones we have today. The computers they used back then were so basic. They had less power than the phone you're using to watch this video right now. Yet, President Kennedy promised something the world had never seen before. Sending a human to the moon, a place 384,000 kilometers away from Earth. It was a race against time. To keep Kennedy's promise, NASA, the American Space Agency, created the Apollo program. It was named after Apollo, the Greek god of the sun. But here's the shocking part. The Apollo program wasn't smooth. From 1961 to 1966, NASA tested several rockets, but most of them failed. In 1963, they tested the Saturn I rocket, an unmanned test, meaning no humans were inside. It was just to see if the rocket could fly. It worked, but only after many failures. Then came the Apollo 1 mission in 1967, a moment of tragedy. 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, were preparing for a routine ground test. Suddenly, a fire broke out inside the spacecraft while they were still on the ground. They couldn't escape. And all 3 astronauts died. The world was heartbroken. People started to ask, is going to the moon too dangerous? Should we stop this mission? But NASA didn't give up. Instead of stopping, they worked harder. They improved the spacecraft, fixed the mistakes, and kept pushing forward. From 1968 to 1969, NASA sent several unmanned missions without people to test everything. After years of hard work, failures, and sacrifices, NASA was finally ready to send humans to the moon. The mission was called Apollo 11. It was the most important mission in human history. If it failed, it would be a disaster. But if it succeeded, it would change the world forever. Now let me take you inside the mission. I will tell you every small detail, step by step, like you are experiencing it yourself. NASA selected 3 astronauts for this dangerous mission. 1. Neil Armstrong, the commander of the mission. He was an experienced pilot and would be the first human to walk on the moon. 2. Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot. He would be the second person to walk on the moon. 3. Michael Collins, the command module pilot. His job was to stay in the main spacecraft and orbit around the moon while the other 2 astronauts landed. They trained for years for this mission. They practiced wearing the heavy spacesuits, walking in low gravity, and even eating and drinking in space. They knew that if anything went wrong, they might never come back. But they were ready. To reach the moon, they needed a powerful rocket. The rocket they used was called Saturn V, pronounced Saturn V. It was the biggest and most powerful rocket ever built. It was 110 meters tall, taller than a 36-story building. It weighed 2.8 million kilograms, heavier than 400 elephants. When it launched, it produced 7.6 million pounds of thrust, strong enough to lift a small city into the sky. This was the rocket that would take Apollo 11 to the moon. Cape Kennedy, Florida, USA, the place where the rocket would launch. On July 16, 1969, early in the morning, thousands of people gathered near the launch site. Millions of people around the world were watching on TV. Everyone was excited, nervous, and scared. At exactly 9:32 a.m., the countdown began. 10, 9, 8, 7. The astronauts were inside the spacecraft, sitting tightly in their seats. 6, 5, 4. The engine started to rumble. The ground shook like an earthquake. 3, 2, 1 liftoff. With a massive explosion of fire and smoke, the Saturn V rocket lifted off the ground. It was so powerful that the entire sky was covered in flames and smoke. The rocket rose higher and higher, leaving behind Earth's atmosphere. Inside the spacecraft, the astronauts felt a huge force pushing them back into their seats. In just 12 minutes, they reached space. Once they were in space, they had to travel 384,000 kilometers to reach the moon. This journey took about 3 days. Can you imagine? For 3 days, they floated inside their small spacecraft, looking at Earth getting smaller and smaller behind them. Inside the spacecraft, they ate freeze-dried food, like dried soup and powdered juice. They slept in sleeping bags attached to the walls, because there was no gravity. They used a tiny bathroom, which was just a small tube with suction. They were weightless, floating inside like astronauts in a sci-fi movie. Outside their window, space was completely black. No air, no sound, just endless darkness. Finally, after 3 days of travel, they reached the moon. Now, the most dangerous part of the mission was about to begin: the moon landing. To land on the moon, the astronauts used a special small spacecraft called the Lunar Module, or LM. They named it Eagle. It was shaped like a giant insect with 4 thin legs. The main spacecraft stayed in orbit around the moon, while the Eagle separated and started going down towards the moon's surface. Inside the Eagle, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were controlling everything. Michael Collins stayed in the main spacecraft, circling the moon alone. Now this part was very dangerous. If they landed too fast, they would crash. If they landed in the wrong place, they could get stuck. If the engine failed, they would be trapped on the moon forever. It was life or death. As the Eagle descended, the astronauts could see the gray, dusty surface of the moon getting closer. But suddenly, a problem. The computer started giving error messages. Buzz Aldrin quickly checked the system. The computer was overloaded. Should they continue or cancel the landing? NASA's Mission Control in Houston, Texas made a quick decision. Ignore the error, continue landing. Armstrong took control manually. As they got closer, they saw that their landing spot was full of rocks, too dangerous. Armstrong had to quickly steer the Eagle to a safer place. 20 seconds of fuel left. If they didn't land now, they would run out of fuel and crash. 10 seconds left. Then suddenly, contact light. The Eagle landed safely. At 4:17 p.m. USA time, Armstrong spoke the historic words, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." The world erupted in celebration. But the mission wasn't over yet. Now it was time for the most historic moment of all, the first human step on the moon. The world was watching. This was it. The moment that millions of people had been waiting for. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were on the moon, but they couldn't just step outside yet. There was still a lot to do before they could make history. Inside the small, cramped lunar module, Armstrong and Aldrin checked all the systems. Was the spacecraft stable on the moon's surface? Was there enough oxygen inside their spacesuits? Was everything working properly? They had to be 100% sure because one small mistake could mean disaster. NASA had planned for them to rest for a few hours before stepping outside. But Armstrong and Aldrin were too excited to sleep. Can you imagine? They were the first humans on another world. How could anyone sleep at a time like that? So, after getting approval from Mission Control in Houston, they decided to go out early. Before stepping outside, they had to wear their spacesuits properly. These were not ordinary clothes. Each suit weighed about 82 kilograms, 180 pounds, on Earth. But on the moon, because gravity is weaker, it felt only about 14 kilograms, 30 pounds. The suit had a special backpack that gave them oxygen to breathe, a gold-covered visor to protect their eyes from the sun, thick gloves and boots to protect them from the moon's sharp rocks. Every small thing had to be perfect. If there was a tiny hole in the suit, they could die instantly because there was no air on the moon. It took them hours to get everything ready. Finally, Armstrong and Aldrin were set. It was time. Armstrong moved slowly toward the hatch, the door, of the lunar module. He pressed a few buttons. With a soft hissing sound, the hatch opened. The moon's surface was right in front of him. He started climbing down the ladder. Outside, the moon was completely silent. No wind, no sound, nothing. The ground looked dusty and gray. Armstrong slowly moved down the ladder. Then, at exactly 10:56 p.m. USA time, on July 20th, 1969, Armstrong placed one foot on the moon's surface. And he spoke the most famous words in history. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. People around the world held their breath. 650 million people were watching on TV. Some people cried with joy. Others clapped and cheered. This was the first time a human had ever stepped on another world. Armstrong took his first few steps very carefully. Because the moon's gravity is 6 times weaker than Earth's, his steps felt light and bouncy. Every time he moved, dust floated up but fell straight down because there was no air. The surface felt like powdery sand. He said it was soft in some places but firm in others. Everything looked gray and lifeless. There were no plants, no water, no sounds, just endless empty land. After a few minutes, Buzz Aldrin climbed down the ladder and joined Armstrong on the surface. His first words were, "Magnificent desolation." What did he mean? Magnificent because the view was amazing. The Earth looked small and beautiful in the sky. Desolation because the moon was completely empty and lonely. Now there were 2 humans on the moon. The next important thing they had to do was plant the American flag. This was not easy. Because there was no wind on the moon, the flag would not wave like on Earth. NASA had prepared a special flag with a metal rod inside to keep it open. Armstrong and Aldrin pushed the flagpole into the ground. But there was another problem. The moon's surface was harder than they expected. The flag wouldn't go in properly. They struggled and finally got it deep enough to stand. When they let go, the flag looked like it was moving. This made some people think the moon landing was fake. But actually, the flag was moving because of the astronauts' hands, not the wind. Now here's something you wouldn't believe. President Richard Nixon had prepared 2 speeches. One speech for success, if they returned safely. 2. One speech for failure, if they got stuck on the moon and died. Yes, NASA knew there was a real chance that Armstrong and Aldrin might never come back. If that happened, Nixon would announce their deaths to the world. Luckily, he never had to read that speech. Instead, he made a historic phone call to the astronauts on the moon. His words were, "Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world." It was the first long-distance phone call from Earth to the moon, and it made history. Before leaving, Armstrong and Aldrin collected rock samples. They picked up 21.5 kilograms, 47 pounds, of moon rocks and soil. These rocks would be studied for decades. They also set up scientific experiments to study the temperature of the moon, the radiation from the sun, the possibility of moonquakes. Every step was carefully planned. NASA wanted to learn as much as possible before leaving. After 2 hours and 31 minutes, it was time to leave. Armstrong and Aldrin climbed back into the lunar module. They closed the hatch and pressurized the cabin. They had completed the greatest mission in human history. Now they had one final challenge: returning safely to Earth. Armstrong and Aldrin had spent more than 21 hours on the moon. Now it was time to go home. But there was a big problem. If their lunar module failed to take off, they would be stuck on the moon forever. NASA had no way to rescue them. Imagine how scary that must have been. In fact, as I told you that, President Nixon had a speech ready in case Armstrong and Aldrin died on the moon. So what did they do before leaving? They left a few things behind. The American flag, a plaque that said, "We came in peace for all mankind." Their lunar boots, to make the module lighter. A small golden olive branch, a symbol of peace. Then they climbed back into the Eagle lunar module, closed the hatch, and prepared for liftoff. At 1:54 p.m. USA time on July 21st, 1969, the Eagle's engine ignited. The top half of the module shot upward, leaving the bottom half behind. Aldrin later said it felt like being kicked in the back by a giant. As they went up, they saw the flag move slightly because of the force of the takeoff. For years, people thought the flag was still standing on the moon. But guess what? In 2012, NASA confirmed that the flag had fallen over because of the takeoff's powerful blast. As the Eagle approached Columbia, Armstrong and Aldrin prepared for docking, connecting their spaceship to the command module. But there was another problem. The docking mechanism wasn't working properly. If they couldn't connect, they would run out of oxygen and die in space. Armstrong carefully adjusted the controls, and after a few tense moments, they successfully docked. Now all three astronauts were together again inside Columbia. They closed the hatch and then let the Eagle go, leaving it to crash onto the moon. After 2 more days of travel, they were nearing Earth. But their biggest challenge was still ahead. They had to survive re-entry into Earth's atmosphere. Here's why it was so dangerous. They were moving at 40,000 kilometers per hour, 25,000 miles per hour. If they entered at the wrong angle, they would burn up. If they entered at too shallow an angle, they would bounce off Earth's atmosphere and go into deep space. And do you know what protected them? A special heat shield under the capsule. As they hit Earth's atmosphere, the temperature outside the spacecraft rose to 2,760 degrees Celsius, 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's hotter than molten lava. But thanks to the heat shield, they survived. At 12:50 p.m. USA time on July 24th, 1969, Apollo 11 splashed down into the Pacific Ocean. NASA had sent the USS Hornet, a huge Navy ship, to pick them up. Helicopters flew in to rescue them. The astronauts were alive. But there was one last surprise waiting for them. NASA was afraid that Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins might have brought back moon germs that could cause a deadly disease. So, the moment they were pulled out of the ocean, they were put into quarantine for 21 days. They were kept inside a small metal room called the Mobile Quarantine Facility, MQF. Even President Nixon had to talk to them through glass. After 3 weeks, doctors confirmed that the astronauts were completely healthy. Finally, on August 13, 1969, they were released, and the celebrations began. When they came out of quarantine, they were greeted like heroes. In New York City, more than 4 million people came to celebrate. They went on a world tour, visiting 24 countries in 45 days. They met kings, queens, presidents, and millions of fans. The whole world was celebrating their incredible achievement. Neil Armstrong became a professor and lived a quiet life. Buzz Aldrin became a strong supporter of space exploration. Michael Collins worked in space programs and helped plan future missions. Even today, Some people say the moon landing was fake, but the evidence is clear. Thousands of people worked on Apollo 11, keeping a fake secret that big is impossible. We have moon rocks, and they are different from Earth rocks. In 2009, NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter took photos of the Apollo 11 landing site, showing the Eagle's remains and the astronauts' footprints. Apollo 11 was real, and it remains one of the greatest achievements in human history. The Apollo program cost $25.4 billion in the 1960s. That is about $160 billion today, more than some entire country's economies. Some people say, instead of spending this much on space, they should have helped poor people. It was just for politics, not science. That money could have been used for hospitals, education, and jobs. But let's look at the other side. What did we gain from Apollo 11? The money was not thrown away. It was spent on people. It created hundreds of thousands of jobs in engineering, science, manufacturing, research. And do you know what? Many of the technologies we use today were developed because of the Apollo program. Here are just a few. GPS and satellite technology. Without Apollo, we wouldn't have accurate maps on our phones. Computers and microchips. The Apollo program made computers smaller and faster, leading to modern smartphones. Medical innovations. NASA developed better heart monitors, medical scanners, and artificial limbs. Cordless tools. Yes, even your wireless vacuum cleaners and power drills come from NASA's research. Fireproof clothes. The Apollo fire tragedy led to the development of better firefighter suits. Apollo 11 wasn't just about space. It changed our daily lives in ways we don't even realize. Even today, some people refuse to believe humans went to the moon. They say, the flag looks like it's waving, there's no wind on the moon. The truth, the flag had a metal rod to make it stand straight, and it moved because the astronauts were adjusting it. There are no stars in the photos. The truth, the camera settings were adjusted for the bright moon surface, making the dim stars invisible. The shadows look strange. It must be a Hollywood set. The truth, the moon's surface reflects light differently, creating unusual shadows. Even Russia, the USA's biggest enemy at the time, never denied the moon landing. If it was fake, wouldn't they have exposed the truth? After Apollo 17 in 1972, no human has ever gone back to the moon. Why? Too expensive. The USA was spending billions of dollars on the Vietnam War. The Cold War ended. The USA already proved they were better than the Soviet Union, so they lost interest. New focus. NASA focused on the Space Shuttle program and later on Mars exploration. But now, after more than 50 years, NASA is going back with the Artemis program. This time, astronauts will stay on the moon for months and even prepare for Mars missions. Maybe one day you will see the first humans walking on Mars. In the end, Apollo 11 was more than just a moon mission. It showed the world that nothing is impossible. It inspired millions to become scientists, engineers, and astronauts. And it proved that humanity is capable of greatness. Yes, it was expensive. Yes, it was dangerous. Yes, people still debate it. But in thousands of years, when people look back at history, they won't talk about wars or money. They will say, this was the moment when humans first left their world and stepped onto another. And that is why Apollo 11 will always be remembered. Like this video, share it with your friends, comment your thoughts below, and subscribe for more amazing stories.